And we'll just wait another minute or so to get started.
Yeah.
Hi, Jean.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
And now we're getting a lot more. There's Karen and Angie, Christine, Hector.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Christine, I don't know if other people are on yet. Sorry.
Yeah, we've got a few people on, or a number of people on, and
Okay.
in a minute, I'm going to ask you to
Mute.
mute, and then also put your name, email, and affiliation in chat box. So all of you can start doing that now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So this is the Mental Health Services Act in Sonoma County, the Prevention and Early Intervention Request for Proposals Bidders Conference. And I really want to welcome everyone, lots of familiar faces, welcome, and maybe a few new faces here. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. And as I said, please enter your name, email address, and organization or affiliation in the chat box so we can all see who's on the call. And I wanted to introduce our Department of Health Services, Behavioral Health Division, Prevention and Early Intervention, Mental Health Services Act, PEI RFP team. So I'm Melissa Ladresch, and I am the Mental Health Services Act coordinator. And I'd like to pass it over to Bruce. You're muted, Bruce, you're muted.
Oh, no, okay, there we go. My name is Bruce Robbins. I'm an Administrative Services Officer 1 for Sonoma County Behavioral Health. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Julie Kawahara.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Julie Kawahara. I am a consultant working with Melissa and Bruce on MHSA projects.
And Amber?
Hi, I'm Amber May Wilburn, and I'm supporting the Mental Health Services Act and workforce education and training. And I'm very new still, so please bear with me. It's wonderful to be here and nice to meet all of you.
You are new and you're doing a wonderful, fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, we are recording this conference. So everyone's clear on that. Bruce, can you go 2 slides forward? 1 more. Thank you. So what I'll be talking about, what we're going to go through today, the agenda for the whole the whole hour and a half, is we're going to talk a little bit about the background and information, background of MHSA and information on questions, the overview of Prevention and Early Intervention RFP, how it was developed in the process. Julie Kawahara is going to be talking about that. I'll be talking about kind of an overview of the RFP, the program types, the populations, the allocations. And then Bruce is going to talk about the actual submittal format, the content, and the scoring criteria. Next slide. Next slide. Great. So Mental Health Services Act is, it was passed in 1963. It was passed in 2004. It's Proposition 63 that California voters passed on. It's uniquely Californian. And the intention behind it was to provide more funding for personnel and resources to support the continuum of care of mental health services in the system. And, also to revolutionize mental health delivery. And for the first time ever, there's money for prevention in mental health. So it was really groundbreaking that we have this. And at this point, it brings in about $2 billion across the state. So it's really significant part in Sonoma County. It's about 1/4 of our mental health budget. So it's quite significant. There are three main components of Mental Health Services Act, for those of you that aren't familiar. The largest one is the community services and supports, and that accounts for 76% of the funds that we receive from the state. Just an FYI, we are going to, for our current community services and support contractors, a year from now, we're going to go to RFP with them, and that'll be for fiscal years 22 through 26, but that's not happening this year. So none of the current community services and supports contractors are, none of those contracts are going to RFP. So prevention and early intervention is the second component, and 19% of the funds that we receive from the state go to prevention and early intervention, and that's what we're doing the RFP for now. And these are for fiscal years 21 through 25. And then of course we have our innovation projects, which is 5% of the funds that we receive from the state. And as many of you know, we've been working hard on getting some more innovative projects, and we had something similar to an RFP, but it wasn't. We invited proposals from the community back in 2019, and I'm still working with the statewide oversight and accountability commission on details and trying to get them approved by the state. So that's a process that's ongoing. Next slide. So Julie Kawahara is going to talk a little bit about the reasons and development of the PEI RFP and the stakeholder engagement that we had, and review the program types, the populations and allocations. I wanted to talk about questions because this is a bidders conference and we want to make sure that everything's fair. There are rules around the questions and boundaries around that. So questions are welcome and encouraged. They must be in writing. And we are going to share all the questions and the answers with all potential bidders. So just know that that's going to be so. Questions can be entered into the chat box or sent via email directly to dhs-contracting@sonoma-county.org. And those questions must be in by 2 p.m. on March 23rd. The final answers to all questions we receive here and any other questions that come into the website through the portal are going to be answered in writing by or on March 30th. Written answers are going to be shared with all the potential bidders through an addendum on the county's supplier portal, as well as email notification. And so the questions that I'll probably answer, or Bruce or Julie or I will answer, are going to be more foundational questions, not so many technical questions about the RFP. We'll probably reserve that to have that in writing, so it makes things fair for all the other bidders. Maybe there were people that were not available to be here today. This was an optional conference. So that's what I have to say about questions, but you're welcome to put them into the chat and we'll address them. And Amber, if I'm missing questions, if you could let me know that, or if any of us are missing questions as they come up and we're presenting, maybe give us a little nudge and say, gosh, there's a question in the chat. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Kawahara.
Thank you, Melissa. So my little section here is going to be to share with you the background on how the PEI solicitation was developed. Next slide, please. So we used a number of data sources that were available to the county, starting with the capacity assessment that was completed and released in January 2020. It covers the years of 2016 to 2019. And if any of you are familiar with MHSA 3-year planning processes, counties throughout the state are advised to do a capacity assessment every 3 years that helps inform them on what are the current needs in the communities that they serve to develop their 3-year plan. And this is a routine process that is standardized throughout the state. So Sonoma County, we conducted our capacity assessment. It can be found on the county's website and has a chock full of information around current demographics, statements about some of what we went through with the fires and the traumas, displacement, stress that the community went through during the fires and the floods. unfortunately, because the pandemic happened in 2020, it didn't really capture information regarding that environmental incident that we all experienced. But it continues to talk about access and barriers because our consulting firm, RDA, did the capacity assessment, and they looked at the data via the utilization of services and our quality improvement committees, where they collect some information around access and various barriers. And as you can imagine, a lot of the barriers either revolved around cultural or language barriers, sort of persistent geographic barriers in regards to geographically remote and rural areas, access issues such as family members or people didn't really know how to access the system. They may be aware of various organizations that provide mental health services, but not understanding or not realizing a centralized focus around screening and intake into the system. So oftentimes people would not have their needs met until they reach the crisis point. And so you'll see, if you review the capacity assessment, you'll see that in particular, the Latinx community has challenges in getting into the system until they're at a crisis mode. And you'll see a lot of admissions and utilization, in fact, sometimes overstays in the crisis stabilization unit, for example, or higher level services. So these kind of indicators and issues the county would like to address, even though this is a prevention and early intervention solicitation. It does have implications for earlier access and remediation or mitigation of mental health challenges before they become serious. So other populations that are identified are the LGBTQ community, as well as the African American and Native American communities in the capacity assessment. You know, there's all age groups that are mentioned in the capacity assessment. And so those were also highlighted. The cultural competency plan that was just released as well late last year looked at cultural and linguistic needs. And this was more of an internal view to the system of care that the county provides. So if you're familiar with Sonoma County, you know that there's contracted community-based organizations, and then there's also county-run and staff services. So those particular, the cultural competency really looks at access in terms of culture and linguistic access into the county system. If you could go back a second, Bruce, back to that slide, I wanted to cover things like training, things, from language access to phone, when they're phoning in for information, intake, staff training, both at that entry point as well as throughout the treatment system, community outreach, education, and various cultural, sort of with cultural nuances and language access, and meeting the community where they're at. So those are kind of the things that are highlighted in the community cultural competency plan. Okay, next slide. The stakeholders that we engaged in this process, we do have a newly reconvened cultural responsiveness committee. They have been meeting monthly in this current calendar year. We reviewed with them the various populations and the types of programming and the distribution of funding. In addition, the Community Program Planning Committee had a similar process at their meetings, their monthly meetings. We spent at least 2 to 3 meetings with each committee reviewing this process and getting their input. They both gave recommendations, which we provided to a newly convened, just specifically for this process, the PEI Development Committee. Many members that were selected to be on these committees were either part of the MHSA Steering Committee and or were hand-selected from the community because we lacked representation of various community members. We wanted to increase diversity, so we had representative viewpoints participating. So the PEI Development Committee, I believe, met 4 times. Again, we did review the populations that were ultimately the focus of the solicitation, the types of programming, whether it was prevention, intervention, suicide prevention, stigma reduction, or a combination of those 4. And Melissa's going to review both the populations and the programming, and then the distribution of funding. What we needed to do from the current PEI funding allocations was to make it a little bit more equitable. For example, the Latinx community was significantly underfunded in relationship to the size of the population in Sonoma County. So we made a decision with the PEI Development Committee, well, we made a recommendation to the administration, really, to get approval to increase that funding. Because it was a finite amount of funding for overall PEI programs, we had to decrease some funding in some areas. So again, the last bullet is we made the recommendation to DHS, which was approved and incorporated into the current solicitation that you should have received. I think there's one more slide in my section. Next slide. Bruce, can you hit the next slide?
No, that's the next slide.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So in terms of our notification and our outreach for community engagement on the solicitation, we used a stakeholder list, which is over 2,000 email addresses, posted it on the DHS website, informed the various committees that we're working with under MHSA funding, and then created an additional vendor list that was unique. Well, actually, there was some duplication to the stakeholder list, but it's a vendor list that has been established and used for prior RFPs. We increased it and added a few organizations that we are aware of that have emerged in the last, I would say, 5 years or so. So that's who we outreach to and informed about this opportunity. Do we want to take questions after sections or at the very end?
Yeah, if people have questions, please put them in the, for this section, please enter them into the chat box.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Melissa.
All right, next slide, Bruce. So I wanted to share the schedule with you, which is in the RFP. So many of you may be familiar with this already. We released the RFP on March 9th. March 16th, today, we're having the bidders conference, which is an optional conference, but yet recorded. And Bruce, it's going to be put as an addendum on the portal, in the portal. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we're going to write down all the questions that are raised here, and they're going to have written answers, and plus any other questions that are emailed to that DHS contracting email address will be answered in writing as well, and that'll all become an addendum to the RFP that'll be posted in the supplier portal, and then it will also get sent out to the list of folks that received the email notification about the RFP originally, and then we're going to do a link to the video as well.
Thank you. March 23rd is when all questions are due by. So if you take a look at all of the at the RFP and you have questions about anything, you need to get your questions in by the 23rd. I'm just noticing a question in the chat, and it's asking if can for-profit businesses apply directly for this funding or only not-for-profit organizations? Can for-profit organizations apply through a fiscal sponsor? So all organizations can apply for this. You don't have to be a not-for-profit. It could be a for-profit organization. And let's see, so the 23rd, all questions are due by 2 p.m. If we get a question at 3 p.m., we're not going to address it. That would be unfair to all the other bidders. On March 30th, we will respond to all the questions via the portal, as Bruce just explained. On April 13th, proposals are due by 2 p.m. Again, that's a hard cutoff. April 14th through 27th, we'll be evaluating the proposals. We have a group of evaluators already selected that have cultural diversity and a lot of experience and knowledge with prevention, early intervention, Mental Health Services Act types of programs. And May 4th, we may or may not need to conduct finalist interviews. We don't have plans at this moment. It's really going to depend on how the evaluations go and if we have further questions that we need to ask at that time. But bidders would be informed at that time. And then May 11th is the notice of intent to award. Let's see, I'm looking, looks like there's another question in the chat. Which, let's see if I can get the chat box. I'm not gonna be able to see faces.
I can read it off if you like.
Oh, thank you.
There's a question about all ages being served. And the question is, when you talk specifically about LGBTQ population, is the PEI funding for youth and transitional age youth, or is it for all ages of LGBTQ people?
The PEI in regulations are really specific that we must serve all ages. And as I get a little bit further, you'll see that we're addressing that. And then there is a specific allocation for the LGBTQIA population, and it does not specify what ages that needs to serve. Our current provider is serving primarily TAY, but they serve beyond that transitional age youth.
And just to be clear, 51% of our PEI funds, though, need to be provided to transitional age youth? No?
Need to be provided to those that are 25 and under and or their caregivers.
Thank you for that clarification.
And that's per the regulations. Next slide. Okay, so there are 7 types of PEI programs as per regulation. We are doing an RFP for 4 types. So this next part gets and we really encourage everyone to take a look at the regulations if you're going to be putting together a proposal, because we need programs that will adhere to the regulations, obviously, or else we can't use the money for the PEI programs. So PEI, prevention early intervention, is the name of one of the components, one of the 3 main components. So I think of that as the big PEI. And then within that, the program types, actually 2 of them have the same name. One is prevention and one is early intervention. So it gets a little confusing. So I think of the big PEI, and then I think of this lowercase p and the lowercase EI. So with prevention programs, these need to be programs that really reduce risk factors for folks that are at risk for developing serious mental illness and increase the protective factors. So it's reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors is the main goal, and to serve the reduction of potential negative outcomes of having a serious mental illness. So that's prevention. Early intervention actually includes treatment. So it says shall be treatment and other services interventions, and shall be is must. And so these are interventions that are and treatment that are going to promote recovery, and they also must address functional impairments. So for instance, social anxiety is a functional impairment. People not feeling comfortable getting out, and that may very well be something that we see as we move out of the COVID pandemic, and some people might feel uncomfortable going outside. And so a program that would help address those issues would be addressing a functional impairment. And there are 2 programs that can be combined out of the other programs cannot be combined, but the program types that can be put together are prevention and early intervention. And there are 2 programs that 2 types of populations that we're going to allow for that. The other ones do not. Next slide. So stigma and discrimination reduction is another one of the program types. And these are things that are going to help people have less stigma around mental health. If it's getting treatment themselves, if it's the way they look at a coworker, a family member, a neighbor who's getting treatment or seeking treatment or has a mental health diagnosis. So really changing the societal views around mental health and reducing that stigma. Suicide prevention programs are going to be, this will be a program that is organized to prevent suicide, which is a potential and final consequence of mental illness. And in this case, we're saying that the suicide prevention activity must include a 24/7 suicide prevention hotline, and that they also may include public informational campaigns, suicide prevention networks, doing suicide prevention trainings for the community, for clinicians, any culturally specific applications as well. Next slide. So here's the breakdown of the population focus, the PEI program type, and the maximum of the contract. So for African Americans, it's a prevention only program that we're looking for $120,000 a year. Native Americans, prevention only, $40,000. Geographically isolated, so that might be northern Sonoma coast, right? Part of the community that's not Santa Rosa centric and is maybe takes time and is a little bit more difficult to get to. And that's $60,000 prevention only. For the LGBTQIA+ population, we're saying we'd like a prevention program, definitely. And you could also have an early intervention program. So you could combine them or just have solely a prevention program. It's up to the proposer. We don't want just an early intervention program. We definitely want that prevention component. And that contract would be for $102,000 a year. For Latinx, we're saying we definitely want an early intervention program. So we want to have some treatment. And that was the capacity assessment that Julie was talking about. That was one of the things the capacity assessment called out, was that we don't have any specific treatments for culturally specific treatment for the Latinx population here in Sonoma County. And it makes up nearly a third of our community. And so it's a piece of our system that's really missing. So we definitely want early intervention, but if you also want to have a prevention program and have both of those, that is acceptable. So it has those either nuance. Then for children age 0 to 5, early intervention, and that's $288,000 a year for that contract. For transitional age youth, stigma and discrimination reduction program. And for the general population, a suicide prevention program. In addition to these, I just wanted to mention that we do also have some other programs that aren't going out to RFP. We have one that specifically focuses on older adults. And then we have both our youth and adult access programs. So we're able to make the 51% goes to 25-year-olds and younger. And we're meeting all 4 of the age populations, which are considered youth, transitional aged youth, adults, and older adults. Let's see, have there been any more questions coming in?
There are a couple that came in. One is, are there general numbers the county would be looking to serve in each population area?
We're not specifying the numbers of people served, but it's going to depend on each one and what you can do. And so that's going to be part of what we'd like to see in the proposal, is for you to identify, realistically with the program that you're thinking of and the types of activities you're going to do, how many people you'll be able to serve, unduplicated folks. And is there another question, Julie?
Yeah. Do programs have to be evidence-based? In other words, random controlled trial?
I would encourage you to look at the regulations, but they don't have to be evidence-based for the early intervention programs. Prevention programs wouldn't have any treatments, so they wouldn't be evidence-based treatments. And that wouldn't apply to the stigma discrimination or the suicide prevention either.
That's it.
I'm realizing I'm answering more questions than I had intended to because I'm so accustomed to it. So I may try to refrain myself as we go forward.
Well, and I think
Bruce,
the caveat here is we will respond to all questions in writing. But I think that for the foundational questions like the age groups, you know, because you can't start your proposal writing if you don't have that piece in place. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to answer some of the questions today, understanding that it could mean you're going to apply or not apply.
good point. And if you don't see an age group specified on this slide, then, you know, that's open to the proposal. The bidder can specify, or maybe they want to have a program that touches all age groups.
There was a question before you proceed about the length of the contract term.
Where the length of the contract term is up to 4 years. Okay, next slide, Bruce. So outcomes. The Department of Health Services and the county, with the support of the Board of Supervisors, we're really committed to tracking meaningful outcomes and working with our community-based organizations to make sure that we're providing high-quality services, they're delivered effectively, efficiently, and also the PEI regulations are specifying, you know, the kinds of evaluations and outcomes they want to see, not the outcomes they want to see, but how we're tracking things. And so, for example, if you have a maybe a 9-month group for teenagers, whether you're helping reduce their risk factors, increase their protective factors, you've got a curriculum, you'd want to do at least something that would show how they've changed. So doing a survey with them at the beginning of the program, maybe in the middle and at the end, and be able to track to see, gosh, was this effective? Did this change their behavior? Did it change their attitudes? Do they have more, are they more resilient now? You know, you want to look at those types of factors. So we need to make sure that you include information about the required strategies that are laid out in the regulations, what kind of outcomes you're looking for, how you're going to measure it, what kind of reporting, the metrics you're going to be using. All that information is important. We're also really eager to work with service providers to identify additional outcomes and metrics that can help ensure that the programs are effective. So what I'm saying there is that once we get a proposal, a bidder looks good, the evaluators like it, and we want to move forward, there may also be some conversation as we get into the contracting phase about, you know, how can we tighten this up? How can we even get more information and outcome information? How can we set it up to be successful to provide really good evaluation? Next slide. All right, minimum qualifications. These are pretty general. The organization needs to have experience and qualifications that you know, look like they can actually follow through with the project, with an emphasis on evaluating and getting some proposed outcomes. Experience in developing and implementing projects that are similar to the ones that we're talking about in these programs. That the organization has the capacity as far as their finance department and leadership and can actually have boots on the ground with administrative structure and the resources to implement the services. That the organization has the ability to work with the community to be served and make sure that it's really culturally responsive, culturally competent, culturally informed, and works well with that community. And then cultural competence is it's this context, a set of congruent practice skills, behaviors, attitudes, and policies in a system or agency or among those persons providing the services that enables the system to work effectively in cross-cultural situations as well. Next slide. And then finally, scope of services. So we're looking for a community-based organization that can provide PEI programs that are going to prevent mental illnesses from becoming severe and disabling, and that are specifying the population. So if it's a prevention program and you're talking about 0 to 5, well, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for prevention programs for African-American populations, for Native American, but not for 0 to 5. We want an early intervention program for that. So making sure that you're selecting from our list appropriately with matching the population with a program type. And then proposers need to be aware that the Mental Health Services Act contractors are required to send appropriate staff representatives to all of our different meetings, our trainings, any related functions, discussions about contracting. And contractors have to submit quarterly reports and annual reports that meet our regulatory requirements. And again, there's a link to the regulations, which we really encourage you to take a look at before putting in a proposal. I think, is that my last slide? Yes, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. Thank you.
All right. So I'm just going to discuss the proposal submittal format, content and scoring criteria. So it's just kind of the nuts and bolts of submitting a proposal. Let's see. Okay, first, the form. So at this time, we're only accepting electronic copies on the county supplier portal. In other times, you would mail hard copies, but that's because of sort of the conditions currently with COVID. The purchasing department is just accepting electronic copies through the portal, and the link is there to the supplier portal. And the due date we mentioned before, I think it was February 13th, and it's 2 p.m. In this case, it's not going to be postmarked because they're all electronic. But there's a digital postmarking when it's uploaded to the portal. And this date is subject to change, but if we did change it, we would once again provide an addendum to the RFP, and everybody would receive that information. It would be posted, but there's no plans at this time to change the date it's due. And let's see, general instructions. No oral or telephonic proposals will be considered. So yeah, written proposals. Submission of proposals shall be an indication that the proposer has investigated and understands and agrees with the conditions to be encountered. Essentially, yeah, if you're submitting the proposal, then you're kind of agreeing that you understand the requirements that were included in the RFP, and including all the terms and conditions that are listed there as well. As far as the format and content, generally, pretty general stuff: a cover letter, information on organizational information, qualifications, experience, the project approach and work schedule, which is really actually the heart of the proposal, about how you're planning to do these services, and details about how you plan on doing it. Cost, that's actually there's a budget template. That's one of the not the addendum to the RFP, but the attachment to the RFP. There's a budget template, which is fairly detailed in explaining the intended, the expected costs and expenses to carry out the services. There's information about joint ventures and subcontractors. So if a couple of organizations are going in together on a proposal, then there's information about how that has to be specified, or if there's subcontractors. The contract terms and insurance are actually attachments as well, sample agreements. And so you have to be comfortable with those terms. And if there's any portions of those that you're object to, then you'd have to state what those are. And then accessibility standards, which is basically like, if there's going to be a situation where you're going to need to provide information that gets posted to our website, we do need to have that be accessible. And so there's standards there, and the RFP itself lists out some information about that and what those standards are. And there's a link about it. this is kind of a lot of words, but corrections and addenda. So it's basically saying here that if there's any kind of, an error that you discover or discrepancy omission, then you should tell us in writing, along with questions, point out anything that seems to be either needs clarification or is maybe an error. And then we'll answer that. And then, any modifications are going to once again be made by Addenda to the RFP. So the second bullet point here talks about how if you haven't pointed it out that there's a mistake, then it's basically the existing RFP is in place, and that's what we're going to have to go by. So if you submit a proposal, then it's it's at your own risk if you haven't let us know about potential error. And then the last thing is, oh yeah, so if there's an addendum, which we are planning on, like I said, definitely for sure at least one addendum, which will list out all the questions we had and list out all the answers. And so that basically becomes a part of the RFP. So you should submit proposals based on that information. Or if anything changes because of any addenda, then you should submit your proposal with that in mind. The modified RFP rather than so you basically have to address any addenda that are attached as well, not just the original RFP that we first submitted, or not submitted but posted, released. And the last little thing was about if there's any oral communication with staff, it's not binding on the RFP, and the final say is the RFP itself in the addenda that we put forth to the RFP. And let's see. Scoring criteria. So this was listed in the RFP as well. The first criteria, demonstrate ability to perform the services described. So that's very important. And you have to have clear planning and operational documents, staffing models, really show clearly how you will be doing that. Cost is up there too. So the detailed budget and budget narrative has to be aligned to the scope of services, and all relevant costs and staffing need to be discussed. The thing here is, the budget template is, like I said, it's pretty detailed. There's enough, the template itself has enough capacity if one organization wanted to bid on all 8 programs, there's enough space there to do that. And if you're only bidding on one, you'd only fill out for the first column and you could ignore the rest of the columns, but there's enough capacity there to bid on more than one program if you wanted to. And then, you basically fill out on the budget template itself. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and you go to each tab. There's one on personnel, there's one on indirect costs, and there's one on operational expenses. And then there's also a section where you are, it's a budget narrative section where you're basically providing justification for the expenses that you're listing. The next criteria is ability to track, manage, and report on performance and outcomes data. So this is pretty important, clear understanding of the outcomes and the ability to collect the necessary data and meet the regulations, the PEI regulations. The ability to deliver culturally responsive and competent services. We discussed that before, and so that's going to be, we're going to see how that's been demonstrated in the proposal, and then score based on that. Let's see, I think we have, okay. Experience, qualifications, and expertise. It's pretty self-explanatory, whether you have experience with similar or aligned services in Sonoma County or a similar place. The quality of work is verified by references. That's one of the requirements, is to have listed references. And so that we're looking for strong recommendations, strong references on here. Completeness of proposal, and that's basically, have you addressed all the areas that we've asked about? You know, is there anything missing? Is there anything that's not really sufficiently addressed? And so there's that's important as a whole to you know, that everything's been included. And then there is a 5% bonus for local preference to Sonoma County organizations that are operating in Sonoma County. And I think, okay, and then the attachments, I talked to about those before, which there's a sample professional services agreement, our sort of contract, general contract template, and insurance requirements. That's very important to review and make sure that those are acceptable. The declaration of local business, which is what I mentioned before, is if we're going to be giving a bonus for that. So you have to, there's a form to fill out for that. And a living wage solicitation form. There is a requirement, a living wage requirement, which is actually specified in the RFP. And there's more information there about that, but there's a form regarding that was attached as well. And then the budget template I mentioned. So I think, yeah, that might be all of the information I have. Is there anything else beyond that, Melissa, here, or are we at the end?
I think we're at the end. I did notice that there
Okay.
was a question about should bidders include, let me get back to that question, excuse me. Should bidders propose? Can't see the whole thing. Oh,
So I
can you
saw
read
that.
it? Oh,
Yeah,
go
so
ahead.
I saw there's one that says, will we have access to this PowerPoint? And I think we may try to have that be a part of our addendum, maybe, but I can't say that for sure, but I think that that's probably what we'll do.
And the PowerPoint came directly from the RFP document.
Yeah, all this information came from there, but yeah, we might just, you know, since we have to go ahead and do an addendum anyway, we may just attach this as well to the addendum, the PowerPoint. But
yeah, so the other question is, should bidders propose a virtual services combination of virtual and other or something else? And I think that bidders should include as many different venues that they have available to provide services to show their flexibility and resilience in these unexpected situations. All right, any other questions people want to put in the chat? All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, and we're really looking forward to looking at all the proposals. We're excited to see what comes in from the community, so we're really excited.
Oh, there's a question about budget, and I think, Bruce, you might be able to answer this. Is the budget template for 1 year or allow for multiple years? As well as scope.
I'll have to get back to you on that. I think the budget template itself is, yeah, I'm not sure. I think it may be just for 1 year, but we'll get back to you on that question and answer it for sure.
And I think with the scope question, we'll get back to you on that as well.
Right. And then the amounts listed. So that is the amounts listed in the RFP, which is what you, let me go back on to that slide. Okay, so this is annual. This is annual amounts right here. Annual contract maximum. So these amounts here are for a year. Yeah. Per year. All right.
There was another question, why is there no stigma and discrimination reduction for Latinx population?
I'm going to defer that question to provide a written answer.
And I would just say that obviously stigma and discrimination reduction is almost inferred in cultural competencies. If you're looking at prevention and/or prevention and early intervention combined approaches. Other questions? Bruce, could you find the slide that talks about submitting the questions? I think it was early on. What's the email address so we can make sure people have that email address to submit additional questions? It's highlighted in orange there in the middle of your slide that you're viewing, dhs-contracting@sonoma-county.org.
And that's also spelled out in the RFP. Okay, so I don't think we had any more questions. Reiterate the, let's see, can you please reiterate the ages clients in the RFP? So the regulations state that you must serve all 4 age groups, and the Mental Health Services Act age groups are youth, transitional age youth, which is 16 to 25, sometimes 18 to 25, and adults and older adults, which is 60 plus. So those 4 age groups need to be served by our PEI programs. We need to make sure that we're addressing each and all of those groups. And depending on what the type of program is, so for instance, the early intervention or the early, what's the word I'm looking for the 0 to 5s? Bruce?
The stigma reduction category?
No, stigma reduction is specifically for the TAE population, but early intervention is
Early
yes,
intervention, yeah.
For 0 to 5 for the littles, as we sometimes call them, the little people. So that's specifically early intervention. So for the Latinx, it doesn't have a specified age group. It could be for any and all ages. Let's see, then are there page limits on the proposal? Not that I know of. Bruce, do you know of any?
Not that I'm aware of, but we'll get an answer on that and provide a written answer, but I'm not aware of any.
I would suggest because it's a electronic submission, it's probably not going to be a page limit, but it might be a, what do you call it? How do they measure the images, the memory, I don't know, right?
File size?
Yeah, the file size, thank you. Character limit, something, well, it could be character limit. I think you're going to be uploading though a document, right, Bruce? Are they
Right.
uploading the document? They're not typing
Right.
their application into.
No, it's you upload.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's you upload your document to, yeah. I don't know what those, if there's restrictions there, but I'm sure it says that on the supplier portal. And yeah, I suppose if there were restrictions and your file was too large, you could break it up or something, maybe into 2 pieces or something. But yeah, that's all, should be all explained on the supplier portal itself.
Is there also a help desk or technical assistance on the portal? Is that posted on the
Yeah, it's it is on the supplier portal itself. There's a supplier desk, like a help email that should be able to answer any questions about access to it.
So my professional suggestion is everybody make sure that you're registered and have an account on the portal within the next couple of days, because you don't want to wait till the very end and then have technical issues accessing it and then freak out and panic. So make sure you kind of get on there this week, just to make sure you know how to maneuver within that application.
All right, thank you so much for being here today. And like I said earlier, we're really looking forward to reading the proposals. We're excited to see what our community brings in. Thank you.
Thanks.
Amber, you're gone already?
Yeah, it looks like she is.
Could you cut and paste the chat just to make sure we have it, Julie?
Sure, I
Thank
just
you.
saved